Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to this ChemCareers webinar this afternoon on identifying your skills and marketing yourself to employers, something that we definitely talk to members about a lot. My name is Laura Woodward. I am one of the Career and Professional Development Advisors at the Royal Society of Chemistry, and I'll be talking this afternoon alongside my colleague. I'll get him to introduce himself and say hello.
Hi Laura, hi everyone. My name is Robert Bowles. Again, like Laura, I'm one of the Careers and Professional Development Advisors here at the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'm not going to repeat what Laura's just said, but hello, and thank you for joining us today.
Brilliant, excellent. So I'm going to just actually really for mine and Rob's interest, just to kind of get a sense of who's listening in today, I'm just going to launch a quick poll, which is just asking what career stage you're at, just to give us an idea of who's tuning in. So I'm just going to launch that now and just give you all a few moments just to complete that. Okay, so thank you for doing that. Actually, we've got quite a nice mix on listening in range. So we've got students, PhDs, postdocs, early career, sort of first 5 years, and also quite a lot in the established career as well. So thank you for doing that. That's really helpful. That gives us a good sense of who's listening in, and we'll sort of tailor what we're saying, really recognizing that actually it's a real breadth of people tuning in today. So like I said, Rob and I are going to share the presentation between us. Do ask questions as we're going through, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can towards the end. There will be a recording of the webinar that will go up on our YouTube channel, normally within a couple of days of the webinar taking place, so you can always access it at any time afterwards. So I'm now going to pass over to Rob.
Thanks very much, Laura. Yep, so as Laura said, if you do have any questions, if you just want to tap them into the chat box, and Laura and I can view them, and we'll kind of go through them at the end of it. So just getting into it really, I presume that most of you kind of joined us today because you're looking for a job, or you're looking to try and change jobs. It's really important to be kind of thinking about what you've got to offer, and that's the same whatever job, whatever career stage you're at. There's no difference for that at all. How are you going to stand out from the crowd? A lot of roles can be quite competitive, probably never more so than now at the moment, and basically it comes down to you've got to be able to persuade your potential employers that you're the best person for the job, and some people find that really quite challenging, quite hard. Sometimes it's about not wanting to appear too arrogant. Sometimes it's about not really kind of recognizing what you do have to offer, because you've never had to do it today. So what we're going to do today is really go through some of the things that you can think about how to approach it with a couple of examples, to get you in that mindset. Now the next slide, please, Laura. So this is one that comes up quite a lot. A lot of you probably have done maybe a chemistry qualification, maybe at degree or PhD level. There's a certain expectation that that's going to be enough. Sorry, click again, please. It's not, I'm afraid. And one more click. So this is really a quote from someone from the Dow Chemical Company, and this is a really kind of key point for you to be thinking about with your science qualification, your PhD, your degree, whatever it is you have. Quite often that's just one of several things that the employer is looking for. So it's your ticket in. It's something that you have to kind of enter that, I wouldn't say quite a lottery, but to certainly be recognised to being in the running. But your career progress, getting that next job, is going to be depending on the other skills and your attitude as well. So that's the bit that we're going to focus on today. We're going to take it as read that you've maybe got a chemistry or scientific qualification. So we're going to be really focusing on the skills and the attitude bit. If we can have the next slide, please.
Okay, so this is me talking about really what Rob was saying, which is really thinking about actually what employers want to understand is the sort of additional skills that you have. So really they're quite often assessing you on competency-based models, where they're really wanting to explore your behaviours in terms of sort of core, lots of people call them transferable skills, but I would call them sort of core skills, and we'll talk about those in a bit more detail and sort of highlight ways that you can do that. And like Rob said, it is not just about highlighting qualifications that you've got, not just highlighting job titles that you possess, because actually recruiters won't necessarily understand what does that job title mean, what does that mean that you've done, what does that mean that you know. So you've got to delve into a bit more detail around the specific skills and abilities that you have. And I think as well, you know, it's really important to highlight at that application stage your attitudes as well. So recruiters are really, yes, they're interested in your knowledge and your skills and your experience. Obviously, that's really important, but also being able to effectively demonstrate to that recruiter why it is that you want to go and work for them. What excites you about that work that you're applying for? What do you know about that organisation, and why do you want to go and work for them? So it's really important that you're thinking about all those things when you're applying for a job, not just providing them a list with qualifications and job experience.
And Laura, one of the things that we get asked is kind of why they do this, and from a recruiter's point of view, it could be a risk employing someone, can't it? So that kind of idea that actually the best way they can predict how you're going to behave in the role is to look at what you've done in the past. So that's why they're doing it.
Absolutely. So they absolutely are interested in that competency model. So when we talk about that competency model, some of you will have probably experienced questions in interviews where it's, can you give me an example of, or tell me about a time when you had to, you know, work in a team. And as Rob says, you know, they ask those questions because how you've dealt with something in the past is a really good indicator of how you might deal with something in the future. And again, that's really useful to recognise how transferable your skills can be, because actually, if you can demonstrate that you can solve a problem in job A, the chances are you're going to be able to solve a problem in job B, because actually what they're trying to understand is, what are you thinking about? What are your thought processes? So that's really why they use that model and sort of ask those types of questions. On the next slide, we've pulled together from some research done a couple of years ago around the sort of top 10 skills that employers are identifying for the future. So thinking about perhaps the next sort of 10 years or so. And you can see within there, you know, some of those skills are likely skills that you have developed, and actually you know, are really core actually to lots and lots of different jobs. You know, problem solving is something that recruiters are always going to be interested in. That ability to critically think, which absolutely, you know, with your sort of chemistry qualifications and backgrounds, you know, you're going to be able to demonstrate. Other ones there, things around sort of people management, coordinating with others, negotiating, you know, all things that actually you probably do to a greater or lesser extent, depending on your experience. So again, it's about really recognizing that you're very likely to have lots and lots of skills that you can transfer into a variety of different roles and a variety of you know, different types of jobs. And I think as well, it's also worth just flagging at this point that when you're seeing jobs, when you're seeing adverts, you do not need to meet every single criteria on that job spec. You know, job specs are written for the perfect candidate who actually is unlikely to exist. So if you work on a general principle that you can demonstrate around sort of 75% of what they're looking for in terms of the criteria, the competencies that they're listing, it is always worth putting in an application, particularly, again, recognizing that, yes, recruiters want to understand about your experience and your knowledge. But like I said before, they also want to hear from really enthused people, people who are really motivated about that organisation, about that particular job. And it's that whole package that enables you to kind of make those transitions, make those moves when you're applying for jobs. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that, Rob.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well to bear in mind here is that you're probably doing all this stuff without really thinking about it.
Yeah.
Then you're not like you're sat here thinking, oh, I talked to a colleague today, we worked on this great project. That's a great example of working in a team or using my communication skills. They're almost kind of, because they're personal to you, that they're kind of tied up with your personality, and you actually have them and you use them without really being consciously aware of it. And I think that's something that it's quite hard for you to get your head around. When you've got a chemistry qualification, you've learned a piece of how to use a piece of equipment, it's quite obvious you can prove that. But something like, part of who you are as a person, that can be much harder for you to kind of tease out and recognize and explain to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And on the next slide here, a really useful exercise to carry out is to actually go away and look at a variety of job adverts and look at what skills are they, what skills specifically are they identifying. I know in a minute Rob's got a few adverts that he's pulled out, but I think what a useful thing to think about when you're searching, when you're actively job hunting as well, is you can search by skills that you enjoy using and ones that you want to utilize in your next role. And actually sometimes that can bring to your attention jobs that you maybe never would have even considered or ever even have thought was something that you could do. But actually, if you're searching by skills, your strongest skills, your skills that you enjoy using, it might actually give you some new ideas about things that you're able to do. And like I say, we've listed there some really good websites to use. So obviously there's Chemistry World, Indeed and Simply Hired are great because they are aggregate jobs boards, so they pull from lots of other jobs boards. There's Read Scientific, New Scientist, Nature, and actually Rob and I have lists of very sort of niche and specific jobs boards as well for particular industries. So if there's anything that you want advice or help on, just drop us an email. But I'm going to pass to Rob to chat through some of the examples that he's pulled out.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I will just say as well, obviously they're mostly UK based. We are based here in the UK. There are going to be equivalents to all of those around the world, and some of them will actually kind of advertise roles from other countries as well. So that's just something to be aware of. So what I've got coming up here on the next few slides, we've got 3 separate job adverts. They're all basically almost the first type of job that I found. As you can see, they come from Indeed. I pulled them together yesterday, so they're active jobs, they're real jobs, they're not jobs that we've kind of made up. And what I wanted to really highlight on this is kind of show that relationship back between what people are looking for. So, as Laura said, these are great sources of information about what employers value, but they're also a checklist for you to kind of be looking at when you're putting your CVs and your applications together. So most job adverts are quite explicit about the type of person that they're looking for. And so at the bottom, this is for a graduate chemist. So this is someone that's maybe got no experience. It's maybe a first job. And basically, they're not looking for any experience for this role, but what they're looking for, they're looking for a passion for science, enthusiastic learner. Well, how do you demonstrate that on your CV? Yeah, enjoyed solving challenging scientific problems, been a great team player, possess strong maths, IT and language skills, have an interest in STEM subjects since A levels. So the fact that you've done a degree will satisfy the last point and presumably the first point as well, but the 3 in the middle are much harder to kind of think about. So but they're all things that you need to be able to demonstrate to an employer to be successful in your application for this particular role. The next role, if we can have the next one, please, Laura.
Mhm.
So this is maybe a more senior scientist. The requirements here are a bit longer, they're a bit more specific. So this does have a requirement for a PhD, some experience of PhD doing research, lots of technical knowledge there they're asking for. But then when you get to the fifth point, you know, highly motivated, proven ability to think innovatively, yeah, verbal and written communication skills, collaborative, open, self-aware, team player, able to integrate across cross-functional teams, and that's becoming more and more important. You know, no one is doing science on their own in isolation anymore. More and more people are doing science by collaborating either with internal experts or people from outside organizations. So being able to kind of demonstrate that, particularly for kind of these research roles, is really important. So instantly you've got a mix there of very technical, very specific chemical skills linked to maybe a research or your PhD or your degree, but there's also those other kind of personal skills there as well. And if we can move on to the next one. So the next one again is kind of maybe a bit more senior. So this is managing a lab for a company that produces kind of analytical equipment. So again, first degree, so that's your ticket in, what we talked about, that's your scientific qualification. So there we're looking for some more technical experience, maybe some management experience for this role, experience within kind of QA and QC roles. But again, once you get past that technical stuff, you're into detail orientated, organized, excellent verbal written communication skills, able to troubleshoot, yeah, work under pressure of deadlines in a fast-paced environment. Yeah, so all of those three jobs, they're jobs that you might go for at very different stages of your career, but they're all asking for a lot more than just a chemistry qualification. So that's really the kind of, just to highlight the importance of what we're talking about. This isn't stuff that's kind of theoretical. It's stuff that the person recruiting in these roles, they're going to have those requirements on a checklist, and the first thing they do to get you through that first cut to get to interview is the recruiter is going to want to tick off as many of those on the list as they can. And Laura, you used to do recruitment at the RSC in other roles.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about the process of what goes on there, why that's important.
How ruthless we are, you mean?
If you like, if you were.
I mean that's an important point, I think, to get across, which is actually, you know, recruiters are often recruiting for multiple jobs, you know, across the year, and so, you know, whatever you can do to make it as sort of easy as possible for that recruiter to quickly identify that you've got the skills that they're looking for really helps. So actually really think about even just the format of your CV. Think about how you sort of display the information. So we quite often talk about using a skills-based CV as a really effective way to quickly demonstrate to a recruiter how you meet the criteria that they're looking for. So in essence, what you would do is get the job description and identify, right, what are the core skills that they want me to reflect back. Look at some of the sort of key words. So actually we're looking at this last one here. You know, think about so here we've got one that says must be detail orientated, organized, excellent verbal and written communication skills. Actually, you could break that down into a couple of different skills headings. So you could have one around being organized and talk about where you've perhaps how you manage your time, how you've maybe managed specific projects. Verbal and written communication skills, so you could have a heading that says communication skills and then bullet point underneath, perhaps a couple of different quite detailed examples of where you've demonstrated those excellent verbal and written communication skills. So what you basically want to get into the habit of doing is kind of making it really easy for that recruiter to quickly kind of skim through and see that you've sort of broken down the job description. You've been able to identify the core skills and you're giving specific examples. So far too often, in my experience, you will you know, in essence, when you're applying for a job, you are probably competing against people who've perhaps got kind of similar backgrounds, or, you know, a similar mix of experience. So it's very hard to differentiate you between everyone, unless you are putting those examples, unless you are sort of giving context to your experience. And far too often, you might just simply see a list of skills that you've got. And then that's impossible as a recruiter to say, well, this person says they can do all these things, and this person says they can do all these things. So how can I choose between you? So really think about backing it up with examples, but go through that job description and try and sort of pull out, right, what are the specific things that they're asking me to demonstrate? And like I say, some of them, it's a big long line and there's lots of things in there. So break those down into different skills and give those examples.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Laura.
No
Do you want to
problem.
move on to the next one?
Yeah. And actually, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, being able to sort of identify a bit further on, talk about those skills. But like we've said here, you know, I think it's really important that you're communicating the skills and the science from a recruiter's point of view. So sometimes it's really important to recognize that, you know, not all employers use the same language. You know, great example here, well organized, good time management, you know, they're the same things. So think about the examples that you want to talk about. Think about the skills that you've got that demonstrate that one skill. But it's also, as I said before, you will quite often need to spell out what you've done and what that means to that recruiter. You know, don't just assume that a recruiter will understand or appreciate the depth or range of skills that you have just by telling them what your qualifications are or what your job title is. So quite often, particularly for example, when I'm talking to PhDs, you know, don't assume that a recruiter will understand the complexity of and the range of skills that you've developed through going through that experience. You know, just simply putting your qualification and hoping that's enough is not going to be enough. You're going to have to really sort of break it down and really, like I say, bring to life, you know, what it is that having done a PhD means, what it means in terms of the skills that you've got to offer. And also try and mirror back to that recruiter the language that they're using in their job description. Pull out the key things that they're highlighting and reflect those back to a recruiter as well. Again, Rob, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, that point about reflecting back the language was really key. That's why I kind of put that thing about, you know, those, you've got two things that are written differently, but they mean exactly the same. Now, if you sit down with a recruiter one-to-one, like we're having a chat now, they can say, yep, we know that well organized is the same as good time management. Yeah. But actually, if they've got a list of 50 CVs they've got to get through, it's a Friday afternoon, they've got to get that down to a short list as quickly as they can, they're not going to have time, or they're not going to have the inclination to sit there and look at each CV individually and work out, does that mean the same? Could that mean this? Yeah, they could, but actually, realistically, are they going to do that? They're looking to be really brutal and cut that list down as quickly as they can. So do things from their point of view, you're actually making it easy for them to find what they're looking for. And that means you're much more likely to make the cut to get invited to interview.
Absolutely. And I can honestly say, you know, when I was doing high volume recruitment, if I could see I could see that someone had spent the time to kind of reflect back to me what I'd written on that job description. Like you said, Rob, it just made it really easy to, almost without having to necessarily go into the detail of it straight away, I could just kind of put it into this person is a maybe, and I'm going to come back and you know, delve into this a bit more, where you're not kind of reflecting that language, and you're you know, perhaps the content is still in your CV, but I've got to do the work as the recruiter to work out what that means. it's not that they're not going to read it, they are, but you're already making it more difficult for them. So I think that's a really good point to make. Next slide. So we've pulled out here perhaps some of the, I guess, common or sort of key skills and competencies that recruiters are going to be interested, and really to highlight to all of you listening perhaps what they're looking for, what that means, and what examples you might have that you can utilize to draw on and talk about. Now, the examples here are sort of brief. They're just to sort of give you some ideas. And I would always recommend, you know, when you are giving your examples, make sure you're putting in plenty of detail. So you're including, you know, maybe 2 or 3 lines that give a good explanation about what you did. If you've got any sort of quantitative data to include in those examples, that can always be useful. But really think about you know, making those examples detailed. So, you know, if we're thinking about that skill of being a strong communicator, it could be things around, you know, where you've had to prepare, concise, you know, written materials, or you know, whether you've done oral presentations to large groups. You know, give examples of what you did, and things that you were thinking about when you were doing those things. You know, perhaps it's an example about writing at different levels for different audiences, where you've maybe had to persuade someone, you know, of a different way of thinking, or you want, you know, to sort of negotiate with someone or get someone to agree to do something for you. Writing grant proposals is obviously another good example, and recognizing that those sort of presentation skills aren't exactly the same as communication skills. I would say communication skills are you know, much broader than that, you know, like we've given examples there. Again, Rob, I don't know whether you want to add anything on those examples.
Yeah, so I think it's just really to kind of, I think particularly if you're coming from an academic background, it's really easy to kind of slip into that. Oh, I've written a paper, I've got good written communication skills, or
Yeah.
oh, I've stood up in front of a conference and given a talk, that's a good communication skill. They are, but as we're showing here, it's one example, and it's kind of sometimes thinking a bit wider and a bit deeper and looking at the outcomes. So, you know, even if you say, okay, I stood up and gave a presentation, okay, what happened as a result of that? Did someone come up and approach you at the end and said, oh, I really like that, let's do a collaboration together? You know, you write a paper, again, what happens as a result of that? So being able to kind of go a little bit further rather than just describing what you do is really going to kind of make your CV stand out from some of the other ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, giving outcomes, you know, is really helpful. Again, giving that sort of context and narrative around what you've done and the experience that you've had. Again, just gives the recruiter more to work with, basically. Another very sort of common skill and area to think about is analysis, problem solving. Again, something with your chemistry backgrounds is likely to be you know, a sort of a core skill that you've developed over time and built on. And again, here's some examples about experience that you might have had, and examples that you could build on. So thinking about, you know, when you've had to define a problem and identify possible causes, you know, whether that's during your study, during a PhD, postdoc, in work, you know, give examples of occasions where you're looking at large amounts of information. And again, you know, remembering what Rob said, it's not about just simply saying I did this. It's about what that meant, what that led to, what the impact of that was, perhaps within your organisation of you doing those things. So you're giving that detail. You know, designing an experiment, you know, you're planning it. What problems came up? How did you resolve those? So again, the more it really is about thinking about the detail that you provide and thinking about what impact that had. And again, recognizing that it's not about the size of that impact. That doesn't necessarily That's not necessarily the most important thing to a recruiter. It doesn't mean the bigger the impact, the better the example or the better your experience. But being able to demonstrate that you're able to think about what that impact is, you've understood, you know, what that meant is what recruiters are interested in. Pass so back to Rob.
Okay. So this is another one that's really common. I think particularly if you're, you know, coming from maybe a graduate or a PhD and they ask for project management, well, you know, you may not necessarily have done a kind of formal project management qualification, but you have managed your PhD project. You know, that's a 3-year scientific project with very well-defined goals that you've had to manage and kind of keep stakeholders informed of how it's going, overcome problems. So it's that, you know, when you're doing you know, research, when you're kind of working in these other environments, it's very easy to kind of take this sort of stuff for granted and just sort of say, well, that's what the job is, that's what I was doing. You know, you could definitely present a PhD as an exercise in project management rather than an exercise in scientific research or studying, because you're basically using exactly the same skills to do it. So sometimes thinking a bit more laterally about what you're doing rather than kind of, that can really kind of help you put out these examples. And I'm not going to go through all those examples on this one, but it's just really to kind of highlight that there are lots of ways of kind of looking at these skills and lots of examples from your career, no matter what career state, you know. So if you have been doing a PhD, yeah, but if you're doing you know, your final year scientific research project in your degree, that's exactly the same. It might be a shorter duration project, but you're still doing all of those points on that particular slide. And then obviously as you move through your career, you'll be working on different projects. You'll have more examples to call on. So yeah, don't necessarily think that if they're asking for project management skills, you have to be able to show that you've got a qualification in project management. That's not. They want to be able to you to demonstrate that you've got a track record of delivering a project, however big or small that actual project is. If we can have the next slide as well.
Yep, and I was just going to add to that as well. Also recognise that the skills that you're building up don't necessarily have to come from your study or your work. There might be things that you do externally. You might volunteer for a committee. You might do something at your children's school. You know, a skill is a skill, whether you're paid for it or whether you're studying. So really think about the sort of breadth of experiences that you have in your life, and think about what's examples are best going to demonstrate that specific skill.
And those examples, you know, if you have been out of work for a long time, you know, it could be really hard to kind of think about, oh, what am I going to talk about on the CV? But, you know, if you have been out of work, you might still been doing some volunteering or things like that. So you can still point to you using and exercising and demonstrating those skills, even if you've not been in a kind of formal working environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Teamwork in leadership. Again, these are kind of words that quite often mean different things to different people, and that's kind of, you know, leadership for some people is, you know, being a leader, a manager. It might be running a project rather than actually managing a team. It could be, you know, basically tutoring or mentoring or training another member of staff. You can lead by example rather than just have formal qualifications as well. You know, everyone works in a team these days. I'd be very surprised if you struggle to find examples of that. But a really good thing to think about with the team working, is what tends to happen is people talk about what the team did, what the team achieved. Actually, the recruiter wants to know about your specific role within that team. So were you the person that, you know, made sure that everyone contributed? Were you the person that, you know, took minutes and provided administrative support for that team? Yeah, there's lots of kind of ways to demonstrate what a team achieved, but actually what the recruiters look at, they want to know about you. They don't care what the team did. They want to know what your role within that team was, and the impact that you had on that team, and what the team achieved as a result of your input into it. If we just move on to the next one as well. So Yeah, so this is what we've been talking about. This is what it comes down to. A lot of people's CVs, we see a lot that are just a job title, that just have, I was, research scientist at XYZ organization, but actually you need to go a bit deeper. So, how did you do what you did? Yeah, what skills did you use? What did you achieve, and why was it important? So this is almost like a mini model for you to kind of help put those examples on your CV. It's a way for you to kind of really reflect on what you've done, what you've achieved, the skills you use, so you can then present that to a recruiter. If we can move on. So this is an example from a CV I saw a while ago. Basically, the client basically said that they're familiar with this particular processes. But actually, when we talked about it, what does familiar with mean? Yeah, how is that going to stand out to a recruiter? He'd actually been doing that for a very long time. He was the expert within that organization, so he actually had expertise in that. Yeah, that was valued by the organization. But actually, so then expertise in that's almost just the same as saying you have the skill in that. Yeah, you're not actually proving it, you're just saying it. So to actually be able to prove it, you can think about, is that valued or asked for by the employer that you're applying to? And you can actually show the value of that skill. So if we have the next example, that really shows, so sometimes we get asked, but it's a lot to explain. You've got to write lots and lots on the CV. The bullet point becomes huge. If you follow this sort of model, you can put a bullet point in that shows the skill, gives a concrete example, and then shows the value to the employer about it. So here we're actually talking about what they actually did. Yeah, we're actually demonstrating the value of that skill. They're giving an example of how they can show it off, rather so see how much more impact that has compared to just saying that you're familiar with a particular process. Yeah, and that's the sort of model that you want to be looking for, and you can apply that to really any skill that we've been talking about, any example that you want to pull from. As Laura said, the impact and the outputs from it might be greater or lesser depending on the particular context. But being able to kind of show that and use this model could be a really powerful tool to kind of help you craft a CV that does have much more impact. Anything else you want to add?
No, the other thing that I guess just sprung to mind based on this previous slide about, are the skills valued and asked for by the employer, I think is just a really important point to stress about CVs, which is actually recruiters don't necessarily, well, they don't want to know absolutely everything about you. They actually want to just understand how can you do the job that you're applying for. So quite often I might read CVs where actually people are perhaps listing courses or qualifications or experiences that they've had, which are not necessarily of interest or relevance. So I think it's really important that you really hone in and focus on the skills that they're specifically asking you for, because then actually that allows you to give those detailed examples like this one here, that really focus on what you're applying for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Ask yourself the question, so what? When you're writing an example on your CV about a skill that you might have, is the recruiter going to read it and say, so what? Or is it kind of, does it tick a particular box that they want to tick off? Go back to that example we were talking about earlier on about getting inside the recruiter's head and thinking about the process they go through when they're giving a lot of CVs they need to check.
Yeah, and I always say to people, when you're writing your CV, when you're writing something down, just kind of ask yourself, why am I telling them this? Do they need to know this about me? And that's a really good little rule to kind of use, and that helps you keep focused on what they want to know.
Because you'll have a lot of things that you could put in the CV, but it's the other question we get a lot is, I want to keep it short, but how should I include this? Should I not include this? And that rule of kind of how it relates to the job you're applying for should always be your guiding principle.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that example we had earlier was maybe from someone that's kind of maybe further on in their career. has a lot more experience to call on. Some of you much earlier on in your career. So, I did marketing for the fencing club while I was at university. Yeah, well, again, what does that actually tell the recruiter? That there's no, is marketing a skill? It's kind of made up of lots of different skills. So it could be that you could actually give an example here where you use your social media skills to market the fencing club to new students. So being very specific. And again, you're showing the output there. Yeah, that could be that club has gone from 50 members to 75, but that actually could have a really big impact on the club. Yeah. So there are going to be examples of the skills that you're using that you can point to. But you just need to kind of think a little bit deeper rather than just saying what you did. Explain how you did it and show the kind of impact of what you did.
Real.
Move on again. Yeah. Anything else you want to?
No, that's I think that kind of, don't just say what you did. is a great rule of thumb. Talk about what was involved, not just sort of basic statements. That's what recruiters want. They want that detail, they want that information, because it helps them differentiate between all the candidates. So it's really important to and I think everything that Rob and I are saying is, we appreciate that makes applying for jobs time consuming, but you are more likely to be successful if you are taking that time to really hone in on what they're asking for and giving those examples, than perhaps trying to tell them everything about you. Like I say, they're really fundamentally just want to understand how your skills and experience would enable you to do the job that you're applying for. I've just got a couple of slides here just to, I guess, just briefly sort of touch on job interviews, and we've touched on this principle of competency-based interviews, where you are going to get questions from recruiters who are going to want to hear from you about specific examples of your experience. So those types of questions will often start with, tell me about a time when you had to make a difficult decision, or can you give me an example of a time when you effectively managed a project, for example. And again, remembering that they're looking to understand your sort of attitudes and your behavior, so the things that you were doing, the things that you were thinking about. So and as I said before, how you've dealt with in the past is a really good indicator of how you might deal with a similar type of situation or scenario in the future. And actually, if you've taken the time with your CV to sort of think about those examples, that's going to put you in a really good position when you come to those interview questions. And when you're preparing for your interview, sit down and look at that job description and identify and think about what competencies do I think they're going to be asking me about. And it will probably be, you'll probably be able to hazard a guess at some of those questions. And I think, again, most employers are, depending on the job that you're applying for and the level of job that you're applying for, this is going to change a little bit. But actually, most employers want to understand, how do you communicate with people? How do you manage your time and projects? How do you deal with a problem when it happens? How do you make decisions? So spend some time thinking about those examples. I always sort of caution, don't sort of rote learn answers, but I think it will give you that confidence when you're going into an interview to go, do you know what, I've spent some time thinking about my examples. I've got specific things that I can talk about. Again, Rob, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think we do get asked a lot about the kind of in interviews, and the other point, but I've written all that down on my CV. Do I use the same examples at the interview that I have on the CV? And the answer is absolutely yes, because quite often you may find yourself in a situation where maybe the person hiring you looked at the CV a couple of weeks ago, and by the time the interview comes around, they've actually forgotten what was on there. It might be that the person that was originally the hiring manager actually can't make that particular interview on that particular day. So and actually, even if they have it, and even if they are familiar, if you can point back to the CV, with things like, well, as you can see from my CV, it's just more consistency. It kind of helps them to reinforce the good things that attracted you to them in the first place. Yeah, when if they call you in for an interview, they're interested in you. There's enough stuff on the CV to kind of match what they're looking for. So actually, make a big thing of that. If you need to it's almost positive reinforcement of the good points on the CV rather than having to kind of start again from scratch.
And that's a really good point, Rob, is, recruiters do not invite you in for an interview if they don't think you're suitable for the job. You've already told them enough to make them think, actually, this person has demonstrated enough of the skills that we're looking for that we want to explore them a bit more in a bit more detail. So yeah, if you are referring to your CV, that's absolutely fine. And obviously, if you can draw on other examples, that's great too. But yeah, recognize that once you've got to interview, you've jumped the first hurdle, and actually that first hurdle of being invited in for an interview is the hardest part. And there's a great, some of you may be familiar with this and seen this already, but there's a great mnemonic that can help you sort of structure your answers, or help you when you're sort of planning your examples, to really ensure that you give as rounded an answer as possible when you're talking about those examples. So the model is called the STAR model, and as it says there, you're going to talk about set the scene. What's the situation? What was the task, and what was involved? What action did you take? And again, going back to what Rob was saying, make sure within that interview you're saying, particularly maybe where you're talking about a team example, make sure you use language that says, I did this, I suggested this, I made the decision to do X, because that, again, that's what they're interested in. And then, make sure you're telling them, what was the result, what was the outcome, what happened, and also to sort of build on that, perhaps in those examples, think about highlighting that you're able to sort of evaluate what went well. So, a few lines about, what you might have done differently in that situation, that can really make your answers really strong. And I think if you have that in your mind, that sort of structure will really help you talk about those examples. And actually it works well if, it's very possible in an interview you might be asked, can you tell me about a time when X, Y, Z, and actually genuinely you've just not had an experience of that, or you've not come across that situation. But actually you could still kind of use that model to talk about what you might do in that situation, what the types of things you might be thinking about, what action you might look to take, because again, that goes back to that competency model of them trying to establish how you might deal with something. So obviously, ideally, you want to talk about things that you have done, but on occasion where you might have a question where you just haven't had that experience, you're still able to talk through the things that you're thinking about. You're still able to demonstrate to them that you have that ability to think through that particular scenario.
And the more astute of you might have noticed that the action and result have been highlighted. There's a reason for that. Quite often when we're doing kind of mock interviews, we find that people, particularly if they're nervous, they actually start to focus on the situation, the task, and they actually provide almost too much information that is setting the scene. And actually that's not that important to the recruiter. They want to know the end bits, they want to know the action and the result end of it. So something to be aware of, particularly if you are nervous at interviews, to actually be kind of practice setting the scene, being familiar with those examples, but actually I would say just a sentence or two to set the scene, a sentence for the task, and then focus on the bits at the end, because that's the bit that they're going to remember, and that's the important bit to them.
Yeah. Back to you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So we're coming to the end now. Thanks very much for your time. If you do have any questions that have occurred to you while we've been talking, do start typing them into the chat. We've covered a lot of information today. We just wanted to kind of make you aware that there is more support available to you from the Royal Society of Chemistry. Our careers website that has links to a number of other information on job searching if that's something you're struggling with at the moment. There's some information there about interviews and applications as well. If you are currently an undergraduate, you can register for the undergraduate skills record. This is a great tool for you to kind of reflect on the skills that you've been developing through your degree, both your technical chemistry skills and your other skills as well. And you can also identify areas that you want to develop going forward as well. And we do have an equivalent for other levels of membership as well. So our CPD recording tool it's a tool really to kind of help you plan and your CPD, but you can actually use it to kind of help identify the skills that you have and reflect on them and actually come up with good examples, which can be really useful when you do come to kind of applying for roles as well. If you are an RSC member as well, if you can contact the team via the careers website. Oh look, there it is. Look, you can email us at careers@rsc.org or go through the web. Both myself and Laura are both on Twitter as well. So if you want to comment on that with the ChemCareers hashtag, that would be fantastic. And yeah, if you are at the stage where you kind of realize that you do need a bit more help or support with your job hunting or career planning, and as I said, if you are an RSC member, then do please get in touch and we can offer kind of one-to-one consultations with you as well. So I think we're nearly at the end of the Laura. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I
and
don't.
we'll see if there's
think
any
so.
more questions coming in.
Yeah, we've had a few questions come in, so
Fantastic.
I shall start working my way through those. I might not get through them all, so apologies if I don't get to your question. If there's anything urgent that we didn't get to and you want to sort of follow up with, just email careers@rsc.org and one of us will get back to you. So a question here about sort of CV length and whether there's sort of an optimal CV length. I don't know whether I've got thoughts on that, but Rob, perhaps if you want to start.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do get asked a lot. I think if you're going for a non-academic role, 2 pages is ideal. It gives you enough depth to kind of get into some detail, but not enough to send the reader to sleep. I think some industry, so it can be industry specific. So some industries do kind of 1 page is the norm, almost like a 1-page resume, but I think it's a personal choice. I think if you get beyond 2 pages, you've got to think, well, actually, what am I writing here that is useful? Yeah, you do get a lot of kind of diminishing returns where you add more to the CV, but actually it's just diluting the really good stuff. So I would try and stick for 2 for non-academic CVs. Academic CVs do tend to be longer, that you quite often kind of there's more specific information that seems to be the norm for those. But I would still just because you can make it longer doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And again, kind of you don't have to list every training course you've been on, every conference you've presented at. You can summarize them, you can kind of highlight the key ones. Presented at 20 conferences, including invited speaker at XYZ. Yeah, so you kind of, just because you can make it longer for academic CVs doesn't necessarily mean you should. But again, go back to that guiding principle about, are you making it easy for the recruiter to kind of find what you're looking for?
And someone here is actually asking, the CV is quite long. They've had lots of jobs, and how far back they should go with skills examples. And actually, you don't necessarily need to list every single job that you've had. It could be that you sort of do a summary for ones that are much older. And in terms of your skills examples, ideally you want to be using sort of recent examples, or as recent as possible examples. Don't feel you need to highlight specific skills for every single job. Just think about what's relevant, and it's fine if you got that skill from a while ago, but obviously where you can, do think about highlighting the most sort of recent skills. Someone here is asking, about interviews. How important is body language and eye contact during interviews? They said they have a habit of frowning when they're thinking and worry it puts employers off. I mean, obviously, you do need to think about your body language when you're going into an interview. Interviewers will be picking up on that. They will, make sure you're making eye contact with them and nodding in all the right places and smiling. So it is important, but don't sort of overly think it, because I think sometimes if you start overly thinking it, you'll start thinking, oh, I need to behave in a particular way, and I'm not behaving in that way, and then you'll sort of lose concentration and nerves. But just be conscious of it. Just be conscious of how you're interacting. Fundamentally, just remember that an interview is a conversation. They want to find out more about you. It's your opportunity to find out more about them. And also, interviewers are not trying to trip you up or make you feel silly. They want to get the best from you. So I think the more you can sort of relax and be natural and treat it like a conversation, the better you're going to perform on the day. Again, Rob, I don't know whether you've got any sort of tips or advice to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard when you're nervous, but I think that point about, recruiters, they're interested in you enough, take confidence from that. Take confidence from the fact that, they've spent the time to sit down and talk with you, invite you for the interview, maybe paid your expenses. So, draw on that to kind of help build your confidence. And relax, enjoy it. It's a great way to kind of learn more about the organization, meet new people, and that they want to know about you as a person as well as your career.
Yeah. A good question here, and actually probably something that comes up with quite a lot of people. What do you do when your best examples of skills are from projects that were confidential? Rob, I don't know whether you want to tackle that one.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a tricky one. I think you can still. So this comes down to, you don't need to get into the specifics of the science. Yeah, they're not looking for a science answer. They're not looking for you to, they haven't invited you for an interview to learn all about your current employer's intellectual property. So take it, maybe step up a level. So rather than talking about the specifics of the science, and you can actually say, if you improve the process by X%, then maybe put that in percentage terms rather than value terms. They don't need to know what molecule, the structure of the molecule you worked at. Just say that you developed a molecule that increased efficiency by X. Yeah. So keep it vague, but still try and show the impact of it if you can. I mean, Laura,
And also, and I would say, recognise that, particularly if you're perhaps, moving between, scientific roles and companies, they're going to understand that. They're going to understand that actually there's some things that you can't, you can't give the specifics on, but you can still talk about, what you did, without kind of, giving anything away. And it's fine to kind of, highlight that in the example, say actually, there's confidentiality issues, but you should still be able to kind of give a reasonable explanation. A few people here asking about examples of CVs. Again, if you go to our webpage, there's lots of links on there out to sort of various types of CVs. Someone here asking.
I'm just going to make a point on that, Laura. I think it's kind of, there are so many templates for CVs.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah, absolutely.
So many ways
to make that point.
could write it, that actually don't get too hung up on that. Don't obsess over what format it is. Do you use bullet points? Do you use ticks? Focus on thinking about it from the recruiter's point of view, and focus on however you structure it, however you lay it out, whether you do skills, whether you do chronologically, doesn't really matter. Just kind of think, are you making it easy for them to find what they're looking for? And I think if you use it as the guiding principle, it makes everything kind of a lot easier and cuts out some of that noise, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I sort of jokingly say it to people, but actually I think it really helps, is almost start with a blank piece of paper for every application that you're writing. And like Rob said, think about what's the best way that's going to demonstrate to that recruiter the skills and the experience that I have. So looking at examples is useful, but yeah, I totally agree. You know, you don't want to fall into that trap of kind of using a template and trying to stick to certain ways. You know, just try and identify what's the best way for you to really highlight that experience to a recruiter. So someone here is asking, taken some time off and had developed skills before taking time off. Do you think previous skills would be more relevant than the time you took off? Is the time when you got those skills important? So like I said before, ideally you want to talk about, you know, recent examples, but actually, you know, there's numerous reasons why people have time away from work and for numerous lengths of time, and that doesn't necessarily devalue those skills that you can demonstrate. So actually, if those are the most relevant examples that you've got, then it's absolutely appropriate that you would sort of talk about and draw on them. Like I said, ideally you want them to be recent, but if they're not, that's absolutely fine. And again, it's all about, are you able to demonstrate to them the things that you were thinking about, the decisions that you made, what the outcomes were, because that again is what those recruiters want to see. Just going to finish off with one last one, Rob, and I know this is something that you perhaps get asked about a lot, is how to promote and present sort of academic specific skills to an industrial recruiter.
Mm-hmm. That could be tricky. So hopefully that you'll see from some of the slides earlier on, I think they gave you some examples of where you're doing stuff that might be of interest to them, but you kind of take it for granted. I think so. You've just got to think about it a bit more laterally. So, you know, if you know, do they want to know about your communication, negotiation skills? Well, you know, getting anything done within a kind of university bureaucracy can be, you know, quite a good way of kind of demonstrating those sorts of skills. You know, you can still talk about customer service skills, where you know you know how you react and how you treat your students. You can point to project management in terms of running your research projects. You can point to financial control. You've probably got a budget for your research group. You can point to being able to kind of listen to and assimilate feedback or being able to adapt with how you maybe adapt your lecturing. I think don't get too caught up on, like, so we see a lot of CVs where people talk about what courses they taught and what modules they taught. Again, kind of think about, if you think about what skills you're actually using to deliver that, that's the bit that's important. And you know, Laura, you're not from a kind of scientific or technical background. How would you suggest people approach that as well?
Exactly like you say, it's not you know, you don't want that kind of list of things that you did. You actually want that explanation of what that means in terms of the skills that you've got. You know, like I said right at the start, a lot of it is about spelling out to that recruiter what that means, because they won't necessarily understand or have a full appreciation of, yes, you might deliver courses in an academic setting, but actually what does that mean that you can do in terms of your skill? Well, actually, you know, you probably have to go away and research and get information and pull that together, and then you have to think about, you know, who you're delivering that to and who's going to listen to that, and you know, the impact of those things, and you know, how you're presenting it, and all those things. So like I said, it's you need to spell it out to recruiters, perhaps even more so where you're making that transition from academia into industry, so that they've got a good understanding of the specific skills that you're able to demonstrate. And as we've said before, you know, you will have lots and lots of skills. It's just thinking about how you describe those skills, rather than just simply sort of listing I did X. They want to understand more than that.
And that comes in a lot about really basically the measures of what a recruiter in kind of non-academic setting are looking for might be very different from what an academic recruiter might
Absolutely.
be looking for. You know, an academic recruiter might be looking for your publication record. They might be looking for experience of teaching. They might be looking for how much grant money you secured. A non-academic recruiter, they don't care how many papers you publish. They don't care what your H index is, unless your area of research happens to match exactly to their area of business. They really won't have any interest in that at all. So that's why you have to kind of go a bit beyond that. And so all the things that you're used to measuring your success in your career on within an academic setting, it's not say that is devalued. It's just to say you have to think a bit deeper about what that might mean to a non-academic recruiter, and hopefully that'll kind of be a useful approach for you to take.
And actually, I make that point a lot, Rob, about, you know, I've had people, you know, where I've said to them, you know, they don't want to know about all your publications, and you know, that absolute look of horror of, oh, okay. and as Rob said, it doesn't devalue that. It's just they're not interested in the specific, I published X number of papers, but think about actually what was involved in that process of having to write an academic paper, having to submit, having to go back and forth, and you know, so it's just thinking about, okay, what in a different way, how can I express that experience? What things does it demonstrate without just being I did X?
Yes, you know, it demonstrates project management in running the research and gathering the data in the first place. It represents data analysis. It represents being able to kind of draw conclusions, critical thinking. It represents negotiating communication with collaborators, who's going to be first paper named author. It represents communication with referees, where you might have some back and forth. It represents, you know, attention to detail. It represents your ability to submit on time working within tight schedules. It represents you organising your time sufficiently to get the paper written while you've got all your other responsibilities as well. And so they're the sort of things that you can talk about.
And I think that's an excellent example to end on, in terms of just showing how that one thing that you do, and you probably just do it because you do it and it's part of your job, how it really breaks down and has lots and lots of elements to it, and lots of skills that you can then share when you next apply for a position. So thank you to Rob for the presentation today, and thank you to all of you listening. Like we said, if any of you want to get in touch, if any of you are members and want to book any sort of follow-up conversations, just drop us an email. And thank you all for listening, and goodbye.